Ryan crouched under his sink, wrench in hand, muttering curses under his breath. The leaky faucet had been dripping for days, and he'd finally gotten around to fixing it, only to find the situation more complicated than expected. Water pooled around his knees despite his attempts to tighten the fittings. "Come on, you piece of junk," he grumbled, giving the pipe one last turn. The drip slowed, then stopped, and he let out a relieved sigh. As he leaned back to inspect his work, a faint hum began to build in the air. Ryan frowned, glancing around. The sound wasn't coming from his tools or the old pipes. It was low, rhythmic, and almost otherworldly. He placed a hand on the sink and the hum grew stronger, vibrating through his palm. Before he could process what was happening, the sink began to glow. "What the hell?" Ryan staggered back, staring as the stainless steel surface shimmered with light. The glow expanded, forming swirling patterns of blue and silver that spiraled outward like a miniature galaxy. Then, with a flash of light, the swirling patterns coalesced into a shape, a tall, humanoid figure with luminous skin and piercing violet eyes. The figure stepped forward, her movements fluid and deliberate as if she were weightless. Her skin had an iridescent quality, shifting between pale lavender and pink under the glow of the portal. Her long, silvery hair flowed down her back, and she wore what looked like an intricate suit of armor, adorned with glowing lines that pulsed faintly with energy. Ryan stumbled back, nearly slipping on the wet floor. What are you?" he stammered, his voice shaky. The figure tilted her head, studying him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "I could ask you the same," she said, her voice smooth and melodic. "Are you the guardian of this portal?" Ryan blinked, his brain struggling to catch up. "No, I'm just a guy trying to fix his sink." She raised a delicate eyebrow, her gaze drifting to the glowing sink. "This sink, as you call it, is an active galactic conduit. Its energy signature was detected across multiple star systems." Ryan stared at her, dumbfounded. "A galactic what?" The alien woman sighed, a hint of exasperation in her expression. "A portal, a gateway between worlds. Your primitive plumbing has somehow integrated with ancient technology." Ryan shook his head, still trying to process the situation. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but this is just an old house with bad pipes. There's no way my sink is some intergalactic, whatever you said." She stepped closer, her violet eyes locking onto his. "Then explain how I arrived here." Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no explanation, and the glowing portal was hard to argue with. "Okay, fine," he said, "but who are you? And why are you here?" "I am Azara," she said, straightening to her full height, which was a few inches taller than Ryan. "A scout from the Kavarian Dominion. I was sent to investigate the activation of this portal and ensure it does not fall into the wrong hands." Ryan frowned. "Wrong hands? What, like alien bad guys?" Azara's expression darkened. "Precisely. This technology is highly sought after. If it were to be exploited, the consequences could be catastrophic." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, glancing at the sink. "So what are you going to do? Shut it down?" Azara hesitated, her gaze softening slightly. "That may not be an option. The portal is unstable, and any attempt to deactivate it could result in a spatial rupture." "Spatial rupture? That sounds bad. Very bad," Azara confirmed. "Which is why I must remain here to monitor it." Ryan stared at her. "You're staying here, in my house," she nodded. "Unless you have a better suggestion." He threw up his hands. "Great, just great. First my faucet won't stop leaking, and now my kitchen's a galactic hotspot. What's next?" As if on cue, the portal pulsed with light again, and a strange, guttural noise echoed from its depths. Azara's expression shifted to one of alarm. "Something is coming through," she said, her voice tense. Ryan grabbed a nearby wrench, his heart racing. "Something? Like what?" Before she could answer, a clawed appendage emerged from the glowing portal, followed by a hulking creature with jagged, chitinous armor and glowing red eyes. The creature let out a roar, its gaze locking onto Ryan and Azara. Azara stepped in front of Ryan, drawing a sleek, glowing blade from her side. "Stay behind me," she said firmly. Ryan tightened his grip on the wrench, his pulse pounding in his ears. "Yeah, not a problem." The creature lunged, and Azara met it head-on, her movements a blur of precision and strength. Her blade sliced through the air, deflecting the creature's claws with a burst of sparks. Ryan watched in awe and a little terror, as she fought with a grace and skill that seemed almost otherworldly. But the creature was relentless, its sheer size and strength giving it the upper hand. As Azara dodged a powerful swipe, Ryan noticed a loose pipe hanging from the sink, its sharp edge glinting in the light. Without thinking, he darted forward, yanking the pipe free and driving it into the creature's exposed side. The creature let out a deafening screech, staggering backward. Azara seized the opportunity, delivering a final blow that sent it crashing to the floor, lifeless. Breathing heavily, Ryan looked at Azara. "I thought you said to stay behind you." Azara gave him a small, reluctant smile. "Perhaps I underestimated you." Ryan couldn't help but grin, despite the chaos around them. "Yeah, well, don't make a habit of it." Azara crouched by the fallen creature, her blade still glowing faintly as she examined its remains. The thing looked like it had crawled straight out of a nightmare, all jagged edges and unsettling symmetry. Its armor shimmered faintly, reflecting the light of the still-active portal. "What the hell was that thing?" Ryan asked, his voice tinged with both awe and fear. "A Xyrix," Azara replied, her tone grim. "A predator from a hostile region of the galaxy. It must have been drawn here by the portal's energy signature." Ryan glanced at the sink, which now looked even more ominous with its swirling glow. "Fantastic. So not only is my house a portal, but it's also an open invitation for monsters. What else should I expect? Space dragons, alien assassins." Azara stood, sheathing her blade with a fluid motion. "The Xyrix is merely the beginning. The longer the portal remains active, the more likely it is to attract attention from predators, scavengers, and worse." "Worse?" Ryan pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a headache brewing. "Great, just great. So how do we shut it down without, ripping a hole in reality?" Azara hesitated, her violet eyes narrowing as she studied the portal. "Shutting it down is not a simple task. The technology is ancient, far older than even my civilization. I will need time to analyze it and determine a solution." Ryan gestured around his modest kitchen, now littered with alien debris and glowing energy residue. "Time? I'm not sure we've got a lot of that." As if to emphasize his point, the portal emitted another pulse of light, the hum growing louder. Azara's expression grew tense, and she stepped closer to the sink, raising a small, disc-like device from her belt. The device unfolded into a holographic screen filled with incomprehensible symbols and graphs. Ryan peered over her shoulder, trying to make sense of the display. "So, what's that?" "Some kind of alien tablet. It's a diagnostic tool," Azara said without looking at him, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "I'm scanning the portal's energy matrix to identify its origin and stability." Ryan leaned against the counter, watching her work. He couldn't help but notice the intensity in her expression, the way her brow furrowed slightly as she concentrated. Despite the bizarre circumstances, there was something captivating about her presence. "So, Azara," he began, attempting to lighten the mood, "you've got to tell me, what's it like being a galactic scout? I'm guessing it's not all glowing portals and killer bugs." She glanced at him briefly, her lips twitching in what might have been the start of a smile. "It is. Demanding. I am often far from home, navigating unfamiliar territories and dealing with unpredictable situations." "Sounds lonely," Ryan said, his tone softening. Azara paused, her fingers hovering over the holographic display. "It can be," she admitted quietly, "but it is necessary. The Kavarian Dominion depends on scouts like me to protect its interests and prevent disasters like this one." Ryan nodded, sensing a deeper story behind her words. Well, for what it's worth, you're doing a hell of a job so far. Before she could respond, the holographic display emitted a sharp beep, and Azara's expression shifted to one of alarm. The portal's energy levels are spiking, she said, her voice urgent. Spiking? Is that bad? Azara nodded. Very. If the energy output continues to rise, it could destabilize the surrounding spacetime. We need to contain it. Ryan felt a surge of panic. How do we do that? Azara's gaze swept the room, landing on a bundle of cables and tools Ryan had left on the counter. She pointed to them. Do you have conductive wiring and an energy source? Ryan blinked. Sure. I've got some old car batteries in the garage and a bunch of electrical stuff from a DIY project I never finished. Why? Azara stepped toward him, her expression serious. We may be able to create a temporary containment field. It will not solve the problem, but it could buy us time to find a permanent solution. Ryan nodded, his adrenaline kicking in. Okay, I'll grab the batteries. Be right back. He bolted to the garage, rummaging through the clutter until he found the heavy car batteries and a spool of thick copper wiring. As he lugged the items back to the kitchen, he couldn't help but marvel at the sheer absurdity of the situation. When he returned, Azara was already assembling a makeshift device using components from her belt and parts scavenged from Ryan's tools. Her movements were swift and precise, her focus unshakable. Here, Ryan said, setting the batteries and wiring down in front of her. What now? Azara began connecting the wires to the batteries, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. We will create an electromagnetic containment field around the portal. It should stabilize the energy fluctuations temporarily. Ryan watched her work, then grabbed a pair of pliers and started helping. So, what's the plan if this doesn't work? Azara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Then we will have to evacuate and hope the rupture does not destroy this planet. Ryan swallowed hard, trying not to think about the implications. No pressure then. As they worked together, the portal's hum grew louder, the light intensifying. Ryan could feel the vibrations in the floor, a tangible reminder of the ticking clock. Finally, Azara stepped back, her makeshift containment device humming faintly. It's ready. We need to activate it now. Ryan nodded, his heart pounding as he connected the final wire. Here goes nothing. The device sprang to life, emitting a dome of shimmering blue energy that enveloped the portal. The hum immediately softened and the light dimmed slightly. Azara exhaled, a hint of relief in her posture. It worked. The portal is stable for now. Ryan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Well, that's one crisis averted. What's next? Azara looked at him, her violet eyes filled with both determination and uncertainty. We find a way to shut it down for good. Ryan slumped against the counter, his mind racing as the glow of the stabilized portal cast eerie shadows across the kitchen. The faint hum was still there, like an unnerving heartbeat in the background. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing at Azara, who was already deep in thought, her arms crossed as she studied the containment field. So, Ryan said, breaking the silence, we've got a temporary fix, but this thing is still sitting in my kitchen. What's the long-term plan? Azara turned her gaze to him, her expression serious. To neutralize the portal permanently, we need to trace its source. Portals like this one don't simply appear, they're created. Ryan frowned, folding his arms. Created by who or what? Azara hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. The technology behind this portal is ancient, predating even my people. It's possible that it was left dormant here, hidden on your planet for eons. However, her voice trailed off, her violet eyes narrowing. However, Ryan prompted, not liking where this was going. Azara sighed. Portals like these are often monitored. If whoever created it becomes aware that it's been activated. She didn't finish the sentence, but the implications hung heavily in the air. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, trying to process. Let me guess, if they notice, we're in big trouble, Azara nodded. Very likely. That's why we must move quickly. The longer this portal remains open, the greater the risk. Great, Ryan muttered. So how do we trace the source exactly? Is there some kind of alien GPS for this stuff? Azara stepped closer to the portal, pulling out the diagnostic device again. In a manner of speaking, the energy signature of this portal will lead us to its origin point, but deciphering it will take time. Ryan crossed his arms, watching her work. And let me guess, we don't have a lot of that either. Azara didn't respond immediately, her focus on the swirling holographic display. Finally, she said, "No, we do not." As she continued her analysis, Ryan couldn't help but notice the tension in her posture, the faint crease in her brow. Despite her composed demeanor, it was clear that even she was feeling the pressure. "So," he said, attempting to lighten the mood, "you've probably seen your fair share of weird stuff out there, huh? Where does Earth Guy's kitchen sink is a galactic portal rank on the list?" Azara glanced at him, her lips quirking into a faint smile. "It is unique." "I'll take that as a compliment," Ryan said, grinning. "Though I'd prefer unique without the possibility of interdimensional disaster." Azara chuckled softly, a sound that was unexpectedly warm. "Understandable." Before Ryan could respond, the diagnostic device emitted a sharp beep. Azara's smile vanished, replaced by a look of alarm. "What is it?" Ryan asked, his pulse quickening. Azara stared at the display, her expression grim. "There's a signal, a strong one. Signal like someone's calling us, in a sense," Azara said, her voice low. "It's an activation signal. Whoever or whatever created this portal knows it's active." Ryan's stomach dropped. "That's bad, right?" "Very," Azara confirmed. She turned to him, her expression urgent. "We need to leave. Now, leave. What about shutting it down?" "There's no time," Azara said, already moving toward the door. "If the creators of this portal are on their way, we need to put as much distance between us and this location as possible." Ryan hesitated, glancing back at the glowing sink. The idea of just leaving his home, his life behind, felt impossible, but the look in Azara's eyes told him she wasn't exaggerating the danger. "Okay," he said, grabbing his jacket from a chair. "But where are we going?" Azara paused, as if the question hadn't occurred to her. "Somewhere remote, somewhere we can regroup and come up with a plan." Ryan snorted. "Well, lucky for you, I know all the best camping spots, perks of growing up in the middle of nowhere." Azara tilted her head, a curious expression crossing her face. "Camping? I assume that means you have survival skills," Ryan shrugged. "Enough to get by. Why? You worried I can't handle roughing it?" Her lips quirked into another faint smile. "I am cautiously optimistic." "Gee, thanks for the vote of confidence," Ryan said, rolling his eyes. They quickly gathered a few supplies, Ryan's backpack, a flashlight, and whatever food he had on hand, and headed out into the night. The portal's glow was still visible from the driveway, casting an otherworldly light that made Ryan's skin crawl. As they drove into the darkness, Ryan glanced at Azara, who was scanning the horizon with an intensity that made him uneasy. "You really think they'll come for us?" he asked. Azara didn't look at him. "If they believe we are a threat, they will. And they won't hesitate to eliminate that threat." Ryan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Fantastic. So not only am I on the run with an alien, but we're also being hunted by, what, space overlords." Azara finally turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I will do everything in my power to protect you, Ryan. You have my word." He met her gaze, struck by the sincerity in her voice. Despite the chaos of the situation, her presence felt oddly reassuring. "Thanks," he said, his voice softer. "But just so you know, I'm not planning to sit back and let you do all the saving. If we're in this together, then we're both fighting to survive." Azara's eyes softened, and for a moment the tension in the air seemed to ease. "Together, then." Ryan nodded, his resolve hardening. Whatever was coming, they'd face it side by side. The silence in the car was thick, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle as Azara adjusted in her seat. Ryan's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. The dark road stretched ahead, the faint glow of the moon their only guide as they headed deeper into the countryside. "So," Ryan said, attempting to break the tension, "what are we up against here? Are we talking little green men with ray guns or something worse?" Azara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "The beings who create these portals are neither little nor green. They are architects of chaos, entities that exist beyond simple physical forms. They harness technology so advanced it might as well be magic to you." "Great," Ryan muttered. "So we're running from space wizards." "This just keeps getting better." Azara smirked faintly, though the humor didn't reach her eyes. "In a way, yes, but they are far from invincible. Their strength lies in their intimidation and precision. If they deem you unworthy of their attention, they often overlook you entirely. That is what we must aim for, staying beneath their notice." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Kind of hard to do when they already know we're here, isn't it?" "Exactly why we need to stay on the move," Azara replied, her tone clipped. "The signal they received was fragmented. It may take them time to pinpoint our exact location. We use that time to our advantage." Ryan nodded, but the knot in his stomach tightened. The thought of being hunted by beings who could cross galaxies with ease was not exactly comforting. After nearly an hour of driving, the car's headlights illuminated a narrow dirt path veering off into the woods. Ryan slowed the car and turned onto it, the trees closing in around them like silent sentinels. "This is one of those camping spots you mentioned?" Azara asked, glancing out the window at the dense forest. "Yeah," Ryan said. "There's an old clearing up ahead. Used to camp there with my dad when I was a kid. It's off the grid, no cell signal, no power lines, perfect for lying low." Azara gave a small nod of approval. "Good, the less interference the better." The car finally rolled to a stop in the clearing. Ryan killed the engine and the sudden silence was deafening. He stepped out into the crisp night air, his breath visible in the faint moonlight. Azara followed, her movements graceful and deliberate. Ryan popped the trunk and started unloading their supplies. "It's not much," he said, handing Azara a flashlight, "but it'll keep us going for a while." She examined the flashlight with mild curiosity before switching it on. "Primitive but effective," she said, her tone teasing. "Hey, don't knock the basics," Ryan shot back, grabbing the tent he'd packed. "Sometimes simple is better." As they worked together to set up the campsite, Ryan found himself stealing glances at Azara. There was something almost surreal about watching an alien, an actual alien, help him drive stakes into the ground and untangle tent poles. "Do you do this kind of thing often?" Ryan asked as he wrestled with the tent fabric. "Camping," Azara replied, raising an eyebrow. "No, my duties rarely allow for leisure." "Figures," Ryan said. "You don't strike me as the roast marshmallows and tell ghost stories type." Azara tilted her head, her expression amused. "Ghost stories," Ryan chuckled. "I'll explain later." Once the tent was set up, they lit a small campfire. Azara sat cross-legged by the flames, her face illuminated by the flickering light. Ryan sat across from her, the tension in his chest easing slightly as the warmth of the fire chased away the chill. For a moment neither of them spoke, the crackling of the fire filling the silence. Then Azara broke the stillness. "Why did you help me, Ryan?" she asked, her voice soft. Ryan blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" "When you saw the portal, when you realized how dangerous this was, you could have walked away. But you didn't. Why?" He hesitated, staring into the fire. "I don't know. Maybe because I'm not the kind of guy who can just ignore someone in trouble. Or maybe it's because you looked just as lost as I felt when this whole thing started." He glanced up at her, his eyes meeting hers. "Either way, I couldn't just leave you." Azara studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she smiled, a genuine, almost shy smile that softened her sharp features. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ryan shrugged, feeling uncomfortably warm under her gaze. "Don't mention it." Before the moment could grow too heavy, a distant noise shattered the quiet, a low, rumbling hum that sent a chill down Ryan's spine. "What was that?" he asked, his voice tense. Azara was already on her feet, her posture rigid. "They found us." Ryan's heart pounded as he scrambled to his feet. "What do we do?" Azara turned to him, her expression grim but resolute. "We fight." The rumbling grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Ryan clenched his fists, his breath quickening as he scanned the dark tree line surrounding their camp. The firelight flickered wildly, as if responding to the tension in the air. "Fight," Ryan repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "I thought the plan was to stay unnoticed." Azara stepped closer to him, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "That was the plan. But plans change when you're being hunted." Ryan swallowed hard, trying to suppress the panic bubbling in his chest. "Do you have a weapon or, I don't know, some kind of alien tech to deal with this?" Azara raised her hand, and a shimmering, translucent blade materialized out of thin air. It pulsed faintly with a blue glow, casting eerie patterns on her face. "This is all I need." "Cool," Ryan said, backing toward the tent. "But maybe I could use something too, to not die." Azara's lips quirked into a faint smirk despite the tension. "Your primitive tools might not be much help, but your instincts could be. Stay close to me and follow my lead." Before Ryan could respond, a blinding beam of light tore through the trees, illuminating the clearing like a spotlight. The rumbling ceased, replaced by an unsettling, high-pitched hum that made Ryan's ears ring. Shadows flickered across the forest as something massive descended from above, its silhouette obscured by the intense light. Ryan squinted, shielding his eyes. "What the hell is that?" Azara didn't answer. She positioned herself in front of him, her glowing blade raised. The vessel hovering above them finally came into view, a sleek, angular craft with jagged edges that looked more grown than built. Strange, organic patterns pulsed across its surface, shifting in a mesmerizing rhythm. From the underside of the ship, a circular hatch opened, and a beam of shimmering energy extended to the ground. Within seconds, figures began to materialize inside the beam, tall, slender beings with elongated limbs and featureless, reflective faces. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, their very presence radiating menace. "Those are the architects," Ryan whispered, his voice trembling. Azara's grip tightened on her blade. "No, these are their emissaries, a hybrid of organic and synthetic design. They are the hunters sent to do the dirty work." The figures stepped out of the beam, their movements synchronized like a choreographed dance. There were 4 of them, each carrying a sleek, cylindrical weapon that hummed ominously. One of them raised a hand, pointing directly at Azara. "Azara of Velithrin," it said, its voice a metallic monotone. "You are charged with theft and unauthorized activation of a restricted portal. Surrender now, and your destruction will be swift and painless." Ryan's stomach dropped. Destruction? That's the best offer they've got. Azara didn't take her eyes off the emissaries. "They're lying. Their mission is to retrieve me alive, or at least the device, but if they can't have it, they'll ensure no one else does." "Fantastic," Ryan muttered. "So what's the plan?" Azara glanced at him briefly, her eyes blazing with determination. "We split their focus. You take cover. Draw their attention if you can, but don't engage directly." Ryan hesitated. "And what happens if they catch me?" "They won't," Azara said firmly. "I won't let them." Before he could argue, the emissaries sprang into motion. 2 of them advanced toward Azara, their weapons crackling with energy, while the other 2 fanned out, scanning the clearing. Ryan bolted toward the trees, his heart pounding as he tried to keep low and quiet. Azara moved like lightning, meeting the first emissary head-on. Her blade slashed through the air, colliding with the emissary's weapon in a shower of sparks. The second emissary flanked her, but she spun, dodging its attack and driving her blade into its midsection. The synthetic creature emitted a sharp, metallic screech before collapsing. Ryan ducked behind a tree, his pulse racing. One of the emissaries was moving in his direction, its reflective face scanning the shadows. He picked up a rock and hurled it into the darkness opposite him. The sound of it striking a branch caused the emissary to turn sharply, its weapon glowing as it aimed toward the noise. "Okay," Ryan whispered to himself. "Distraction skills still solid." He peeked out from behind the tree only to see the other emissary stalking toward him. His mind raced. Grabbing a fallen branch, he waited until the emissary was close enough, then swung with all his might. The branch snapped against the emissary's weapon, sending a shower of sparks flying. Yeah, bad idea," Ryan muttered, stumbling back as the emissary raised its weapon. Before it could fire, Azara appeared behind it, her blade slicing cleanly through its neck. The emissary crumpled to the ground, sparks sputtering from its severed head. "Stay down," Azara barked, pulling Ryan to his feet. "We're not done yet." The final emissary raised its weapon, firing a bolt of crackling energy that narrowly missed them. Azara pushed Ryan out of the way and charged, her movements a blur. She leaped into the air, bringing her blade down with precision. The emissary tried to block, but her strike severed its weapon and a second blow finished it. The clearing fell silent, save for Ryan's labored breathing. Azara stood over the fallen emissaries, her blade fading into nothingness as she turned to him. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice softer now. Ryan shook his head, though his legs felt like jelly. "I'm fine, thanks to you." Azara's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles. "You held your own, not bad for a primitive." Ryan let out a shaky laugh, leaning against a tree for support. "Yeah, well, I'm starting to think I should have stayed home and fixed my sink." Azara chuckled, a sound that was almost musical. "You'd be dead if you had." "Fair point," Ryan said, his laughter fading as he glanced at the emissary's lifeless forms. "But this isn't over, is it?" Azara's expression grew serious. "No, this was just the beginning." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the destroyed emissary's weapon sputtering out. Ryan slumped against a tree, trying to catch his breath. His heart was pounding so hard he felt it might burst out of his chest. He looked over at Azara, who stood among the fallen emissaries, her gaze fixed on the smoldering wreckage of their bodies. "Beginning of what exactly?" Ryan finally asked, his voice hoarse. Azara didn't respond immediately. Her shoulders were tense, her usual calm demeanor replaced with a look of wary calculation. She knelt beside one of the emissaries and inspected its weapon. With a few deft movements, she dismantled it, pulling out a small, glowing core. She held it up, examining the pulsing light within. "Beginning of the chase," she said at last, standing and pocketing the core. "The architects will know their hunters have failed. They won't stop until they retrieve the portal key or destroy it." Ryan groaned, rubbing his face. "Right, the portal key. Which is what exactly? Some kind of fancy alien doodad." Azara hesitated, then reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, intricately carved device. It was about the size of a tennis ball, its surface covered in glowing, swirling patterns that shifted like liquid metal. "This is the portal key," she said quietly. "It's a fragment of the architect's core technology. It has the power to activate dormant gateways scattered across the galaxy, linking worlds that have been disconnected for eons." Ryan blinked, staring at the object in her hand. "You're telling me my sink is one of those gateways?" Azara's lips quirked into a faint smile. "It appears so. The architects must have left it here centuries ago, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to stumble upon it. The water flowing through your sink likely triggered a faint activation signal, which is how I tracked it." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, letting out a disbelieving laugh. "Unreal. I thought I was just dealing with bad plumbing, and now I'm apparently sitting on some kind of intergalactic treasure." Azara's expression darkened. "It's not treasure, Ryan, it's a weapon. In the wrong hands, it could destroy entire civilizations, or enslave them. That's why the architects want it back so desperately. They fear what it could do if it's used against them." "Great," Ryan muttered. So what do we do now? Just keep running? Azara's gaze softened as she looked at him. Running won't solve anything. We need to find a way to destroy the key before the architects get to us. Ryan frowned, his stomach sinking. Destroy it? I thought you said it's too powerful to fall into the wrong hands. Doesn't that include us? It's a risk, Azara admitted, her voice tinged with regret. But it's the only way to ensure it can't be used against anyone. Ryan stared at her, the weight of her words settling on his chest. What happens to you if we destroy it? Will they still come after you? Azara hesitated, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked uncertain. I don't know. Without the key, I'm just another fugitive. They might lose interest, or they might decide I'm still a threat. Ryan crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. Well, that's not good enough for me. If we're doing this, we're finding a way to get you out of this mess alive. Both of us. Azara's eyes softened, and for a moment she looked as though she wanted to argue. But then she nodded, a faint smile playing at her lips. You're stubborn, you know that. Yeah, well, I'm not exactly new to fixing impossible problems, Ryan said, his voice laced with determination. So where do we start? Azara stepped closer to him, her expression resolute. There's a place, a sanctuary hidden deep in the outer reaches of the galaxy. It's protected by ancient technology, impervious even to the architects. If we can get there, we might find a way to safely dismantle the key without triggering a catastrophic backlash. Sanctuary, huh? Ryan said, his mind racing. Sounds better than being vaporized. How do we get there? Azara's smirk returned, though it was tinged with a hint of uncertainty. We'll need a ship. And I'm guessing you don't have one stashed in your garage. Ryan chuckled despite himself. Not unless you count my rusty old truck. But seriously, how are we supposed to find a spaceship on Earth? Azara's expression turned thoughtful. The architects may have left more than just the portal behind. If there are dormant gateways here, there could also be abandoned vessels or technology nearby. We'll need to search. Search where? Ryan asked, already dreading the answer. Azara's gaze flicked toward the horizon. The place where this all began, the sink. If there's a gateway hidden there, it might lead us to what we need. Ryan stared at her, his gut churning with unease. You're saying we need to go back to my house, the place they're probably already tracking. Azara nodded, her expression grim. It's a risk we have to take. If we don't, we won't stand a chance. Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. All right, let's do it, but if we get captured, I'm blaming you. Azara's smile was faint but genuine. Fair enough, let's move quickly. We don't have much time. As they packed up what little they had and prepared to leave the clearing, Ryan felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with a strange sense of hope. He wasn't sure how they were going to pull this off, but one thing was certain. He wasn't about to let Azara face this fight alone. The journey back to Ryan's house felt strangely quiet, almost as if the world itself was holding its breath. With each step, the urgency of the situation grew, and the closer they got to his neighborhood, the more Ryan felt the weight of the impending danger. He kept his eyes peeled for anything suspicious, but the streets looked just like they always did, sleepy, suburban, and utterly normal. Except, of course, for the fact that his bathroom sink had turned into some kind of intergalactic portal. Azara walked beside him, her movements swift and graceful, her eyes scanning their surroundings with a sharpness Ryan couldn't ignore. He felt both comforted and unnerved by her presence. She was calm, collected, unlike him, whose mind kept racing in circles. The weight of the key, hidden somewhere on his person, reminded him that they were running out of time. You think we'll be able to get there undetected? Ryan asked, breaking the silence. Azara didn't look at him as she answered. I've been through much worse. As long as we stay off the main routes, we should be fine. The architects are too focused on the immediate threat to notice the small details. Ryan snorted. Yeah, small details. Like a random guy and an alien walking through an empty street at night. She finally glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. You don't give yourself enough credit. People aren't as observant as you think. Ryan shot her a sidelong glance. "That's reassuring. I'm like a master of blending in." "You're blending," she said dryly, "but only because you've been too distracted to be noticed." "Which works in our favor. Keep walking." He laughed under his breath. "I'm glad you think so. I don't feel very stealthy." Soon enough they reached his street. Ryan's house stood at the far end of a cul-de-sac, almost too quiet in the dark. He didn't want to think about the danger of being so exposed, but the closer they got, the more real the threat became. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the very ground beneath them was shifting with tension. Azara stopped just outside his front yard, her eyes scanning the house with a sharp, focused gaze. "We can't just walk in through the front door." "Yeah," Ryan muttered, glancing around. "I was thinking the same thing." He turned to Azara. "How exactly do we do this without being noticed?" Azara's gaze drifted to the side of the house. "The window at the back. We can climb in there." Ryan's heart skipped. "You're telling me we're sneaking in through my window? You really think that's the best idea?" "Do you have a better one?" she asked, voice steady. Ryan paused, glancing back at the dark street. "I guess not." "Then we move fast," she said, already taking the first step toward the side of the house. Ryan sighed and followed, trying to keep his movements as quiet as possible. As they reached the back of the house, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. But when nothing happened, he allowed himself to breathe a little easier. Azara motioned toward the window, and Ryan nodded. The window was small but open, the night air filtering through the gap. He could see his bedroom just on the other side. With practiced ease, Azara hoisted herself up and slid into the house, disappearing from view. Ryan followed, climbing up the side of the house with surprising agility for someone who wasn't used to scaling walls. The sensation of his feet on the ground of his bedroom was almost surreal. The place he'd once felt so safe now felt like a battleground. "All right," Ryan said, glancing around his room. "What now?" Azara moved toward the bathroom, her steps determined. "We need to find the portal's exact location. It may have a residual signature here, left behind when it activated." Ryan followed her into the small bathroom, the dim light flickering from the ceiling. The sink, which had once been nothing more than a plumbing nuisance, now felt like a ticking time bomb. Azara crouched beside the sink, her fingers brushing against the edges of the counter. Ryan watched her closely, a mix of awe and fear simmering inside him. He hadn't realized just how deep this rabbit hole went until now, how much bigger this had become. "You really think we can destroy it?" Ryan asked, his voice low. "I mean, what if we mess it up?" Azara turned her head slightly, her eyes softening as they met his. "We will do everything we can, but sometimes destruction is the only way to ensure safety." A cold shiver ran down Ryan's spine. He looked at the sink again, wondering what would happen next. The sink seemed ordinary, but now every small detail felt alien. The feeling of something hidden beneath the surface lingered, and he couldn't shake the thought that if they were wrong, they could unleash something far worse. Azara placed her hand flat against the sink, closing her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, her gaze was steely. "I can sense its presence. It's deeper than I thought." Ryan tensed. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, her voice a whisper, "the portal might be linked to something much larger than I imagined." Before Ryan could respond, the room seemed to tremble just slightly, but enough for him to feel it. Something had triggered. Something big. The key on his belt pulsed, a soft but insistent hum vibrating against his side. Ryan's heart skipped. This was it. They weren't alone anymore. The hum from the key grew louder, vibrating through the very walls of the house. Ryan's eyes widened as he reached for it instinctively, the sensation of the object alive in his hand sending a chill down his spine. He could feel the shift in the air, the change in energy that Azara had warned him about. Whatever had been lingering beneath the surface had now been stirred. Azara's gaze was intense, her hand still pressed against the sink, her entire body rigid with concentration. "We've disturbed it," she muttered, her voice low and tight with urgency. The architects will be drawn here now. We don't have much time. Ryan's pulse quickened. Who are these architects? You've mentioned them a few times, but you never really explained. Azara didn't look at him, her focus entirely on the sink. They are the ancient beings who control the portals. They govern the fabric between worlds, but they are not like the beings you know. Their motives are complex and dangerous. They're responsible for maintaining balance or destroying it depending on their whims. Ryan swallowed hard, his mind racing with the implications. The architects, beings capable of controlling entire dimensions, were aware of them now. The key, their ticket to survival, might very well be the thing that had made them a target. He glanced down at the object, tucked securely in his pocket. So, what happens if they find us? They will destroy the source, Azara replied, her tone grim. And they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone standing in their way. Ryan's thoughts spun. The key had to be the way to close the portal, but if they destroyed it, they'd never be able to get back. His fingers twitched, wanting to pull it out, but Azara's warning held him in place. Azara, if we can't destroy the sink, this portal thing, then what do we do? Her eyes flicked over to him, and for the first time there was a flicker of something unfamiliar in her gaze, a hesitation, as if she was weighing her next words carefully. If we can't close it, we have no choice but to escape. The architects are relentless. They would follow us across the universe if it meant ensuring their control. Escape. The word echoed in Ryan's mind, sinking in slowly. He had never considered running. There was something almost humiliating about it. But what choice did they have? He could already feel the atmosphere thickening with tension, like the air was being drawn tighter and tighter around them. Azara's hand finally left the sink and she stood, turning to face him. If we leave now, we have a chance, but it won't be easy. We will have to fight for every step. Ryan nodded, steeling himself. I'm ready. But as he spoke, the hum from the key intensified. It was almost deafening now, vibrating against the walls, filling the entire room with an oppressive energy. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest and he instinctively reached for the key again, but this time, the hum was accompanied by something far darker, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from within the very walls of the house itself. Ryan froze, his mind racing. Did you hear that? Azara's expression hardened. We don't have time, we have to go, now. Before he could respond, the air around them seemed to shimmer, a strange, swirling distortion taking shape in the corner of the room. The sink, the portal, began to glow with a blinding intensity, the glow rippling like liquid light, as if it were pulling in every shred of energy in the room. Ryan's blood ran cold. The architects weren't just on their way, they were already here. Azara, he gasped, his voice shaking. What do we do? Her eyes met his with a fire that, for the first time, gave him some semblance of hope. We fight, we don't run, we never run. The room exploded into action. With a swift motion, Azara pulled something from her belt, a sleek, silver device that seemed to hum with a power all its own. She pressed a button and the room around them shifted. The air crackled with energy and Ryan felt his skin tingle as the atmosphere seemed to warp. It was the first time he'd seen her wield her technology with such precision. It wasn't just advanced, it was ancient too, something far beyond his comprehension. What is that? Ryan managed, his voice low in awe. Azara didn't answer. She was already moving toward the portal, her movements fluid and decisive. It's our only chance. Ryan's mind barely had time to catch up. As she closed in on the portal, the air grew heavier, and the growling sound, that low, primal growl, intensified. Something was coming, something dangerous, something big. Suddenly, there was a burst of blinding light. Ryan raised his arm to shield his eyes, but it was no use. The light was everywhere, swallowing up the room, flooding his senses. And then, as quickly as it had come, the light dissipated, leaving behind only a ringing silence. Ryan opened his eyes slowly, trying to adjust to the change in atmosphere. But what he saw made his heart stop. The room was no longer his. The walls were gone, replaced by a vast, darkened expanse, an endless void of swirling stars. And standing before him, surrounded by a glowing aura, was a figure, tall, imposing, and covered in dark armor that seemed to shimmer with cosmic energy. The architects had arrived. Ryan's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped forward. Its presence was suffocating, the very air around it warped, as if reality itself bent to its will. The creature was humanoid, tall and angular, with glowing runes etched into its armor that pulsed like distant stars. Its face was a hollow, featureless mask, only two narrow slits where eyes might be, faintly glowing with an unnatural light. The silence between them was suffocating, and Ryan felt every fiber of his being telling him to run. But Azara was there, standing firm beside him, her expression unreadable. "Azara," the figure's voice echoed, a deep, resonating sound that vibrated through his bones. It was not a voice that belonged to anything human. It was as though it came from the depths of space itself, an ancient force that defied understanding. "You have opened the door. You have broken the rule." Azara's posture stiffened, but she didn't flinch. "I did not break the rule," she replied evenly, her tone cold, controlled. "I sought only to understand it. The sink, the portal, the key, none of this was by my choice." Ryan, still trying to make sense of everything, barely managed to form a coherent thought. "What are you?" he asked, his voice shaking despite his best effort to sound steady. The figure turned its head slowly toward him, the weight of its gaze pressing down on him with overwhelming force. "I am the architect of the threshold," it said, its voice like the slow grind of grinding gears. "I am the keeper of the space between worlds, and you, human, have interfered with forces far beyond your understanding." Ryan's pulse raced. "What do you want from us?" Azara stepped forward, her voice firm as she spoke to the architect. "We are not your enemies. We only sought to find answers." The architect's head tilted slightly, its glowing slits narrowing. "Answers to what? A mystery that is not yours to solve. Your world, your existence, was never meant to collide with this realm. You are the interloper, and for that you will be eradicated." Ryan's heart hammered in his chest as he processed the threat. "You're saying you're going to kill us?" The architect remained silent for a moment, its attention shifting between him and Azara as if evaluating them. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised one armored hand. "Not death, human, not yet, but you will face the consequences of your actions. The portal you've opened will destabilize this entire reality, and in doing so, you will face its collapse." Azara's face darkened and she turned toward Ryan. "This isn't just about us. This is about the balance of all worlds, Ryan. The architects are bound to protect the equilibrium. If the sink, this portal, isn't closed, it will cause a chain reaction, one that destroys everything, everywhere. There's no escaping it." Ryan felt his stomach drop. The weight of the situation was finally sinking in. This wasn't just a matter of saving themselves anymore. They had unleashed something far bigger than them, something that could tear apart everything they knew. "I didn't mean to," Ryan whispered, his hands trembling as he gripped the key in his pocket. "We didn't know." "Your ignorance will not save you," the architect intoned, the air growing colder as its presence pressed down even more. "The time of reckoning is upon you." Azara stepped closer to Ryan, her hand brushing his. She turned her gaze to the architect, standing tall and resolute. "We still have a chance," she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "We can fix this." The architect's laugh was like the sound of a distant thunderstorm, low and rumbling. "There is no fixing what has been broken, but you may try, you may fail. I will allow you the illusion of choice. But know this, the portal cannot be undone by force alone. You will need the key." Ryan's heart stuttered. The key. It was their only hope, but it was also their greatest risk. Would it even work? Or was it simply another tool for the architect to use against them? "I'll do whatever it takes," Ryan said, his voice firm now, despite the fear gnawing at him. He looked at Azara, and for a fleeting moment he saw something in her eyes, a mixture of determination and sorrow. It was clear she had known the stakes all along. But now, it was too late to turn back. Azara nodded once, as if she had already made her peace with the path they had chosen. We need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more the architects will tighten their grip on this reality. The architect raised its hand again, its gaze never leaving them. You have one chance, human. One chance to prove your worth. Ryan looked at Azara, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. She was no longer the cold, distant alien he had first met. She was someone who had risked everything to protect him, to give him a chance at a life beyond his own world. And now, they were in this together. "Let's do this," Ryan said, his voice steady with resolve. Azara moved toward the glowing sink, her hand reaching for the pulsating surface. As her fingers made contact, the world around them seemed to shift again, reality bending as the portal opened wider. The air around them grew thick, oppressive, like the weight of 1,000 worlds pressing in from every side. Ryan stepped forward, pulling the key from his pocket. He felt the weight of it in his hand, the hum of its power vibrating through his fingertips. This was it, the key to everything. It was their only chance. The architect's voice reverberated through the space, its final warning cutting through the tension. "This is your last moment, human. If you fail, all will be lost." Ryan swallowed hard, his eyes locked on Azara's. "I won't fail." "Great, I'll continue and finish it up." The sink pulsed as Azara's fingers brushed across the surface, its glow intensifying. Ryan's grip on the key tightened, a surge of energy shooting through him. The air around them crackled with power, like the very fabric of reality was being stretched, torn at the edges. The architect stood still, its presence looming, watching, waiting for them to fail. Azara's expression hardened, her voice low but resolute. "We're not going to fail. We can do this." Ryan nodded, stepping forward. He could feel the hum of the key in his hand now, almost as if it were alive, resonating with the portal. The sink's glow flared brighter, threatening to blind them. There was no turning back. "This is it," Ryan muttered, his voice barely audible over the roar of energy. "We have to close it. We have to send everything back before it destroys us all." The architect's voice sliced through the air again, cold and foreboding. "You cannot control the flow of this power. The portal will collapse upon itself. Your world will cease to exist." But Azara was undeterred. She met Ryan's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. In this moment, their connection, beyond language, beyond species, was unbreakable. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting each other and, by extension, the worlds they had touched. Ryan stepped forward, placing the key into the center of the sink. The moment it made contact, the energy around them surged, a brilliant explosion of light and sound. The architect moved, its figure blurring as the force of the blast rippled outward, but Azara was there beside Ryan, holding him steady as the world shook. "Hold on," Azara shouted over the roar. Ryan gritted his teeth, holding the key in place. The pulse of energy from the portal flared wildly, the sink now a vortex of swirling light, tendrils of cosmic force reaching out as if trying to consume them. His hand burned with the pressure of the key, its power pressing against him, threatening to tear him apart. "Azara, it's too much," Ryan shouted, but she didn't budge. Instead, she placed her hand over his, reinforcing his grip. "No, Ryan. We're in this together," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. The architect raised its hand once more, but this time it wasn't to strike. The creature's voice was quieter, almost solemn. "You have chosen to defy the order of the cosmos. This may be your undoing." Azara stood her ground. "Then let it be my choice," she said, her voice unwavering. Ryan felt the connection between them deepen, a silent bond of trust and strength that transcended their differences. He could feel her resolve as clearly as his own. Together, they had already overcome so much. Now they would finish what they started. With a final, desperate push, Ryan and Azara locked the key into place. The light from the portal surged outward, a wave of pure energy that seemed to collapse time itself. For a split second, everything was silent still, and then it shattered. A final burst of light. Azara and Ryan were thrown back, landing hard against the floor as the sink flickered one last time. The portal, no longer a swirling vortex, collapsed into nothingness. The architect stood motionless for a long moment as if contemplating their actions. Then, slowly, it lowered its arm. "You have succeeded. For now," it said, its voice heavy with unspoken meaning. "But understand this, your actions will have consequences. You have opened the door and the key you hold is far more than it seems." Ryan scrambled to his feet, pulling Azara up beside him. "What does that mean?" he demanded, but the architect's figure began to fade, its form disintegrating into the ether. Azara turned to him, a look of quiet concern in her eyes. "It means we haven't seen the last of this. The architect was right about one thing. We've opened something bigger than ourselves." Ryan's heart thudded in his chest, but Azara squeezed his hand. "But we did it, together." And in that moment, surrounded by the remnants of a collapsed reality, they knew that whatever came next, whatever forces they had unleashed, they would face it as one. Not as a human and an alien, but as two beings bound by a shared fate. The adventure wasn't over. It was only just beginning, the end. For now, want more thrilling adventures like this? Don't miss out. Subscribe now and join us for brand new stories every day. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the next twist in the tale. We've got so much more to share.